Thank you. I apologize for my absence. I've had presiding officer duty on the Senate floor. General Scaparrotti, that's the equivalent of staff duty for a junior officer at the regiment, if you're not aware. I want to address something specifically that you stated in your testimony on page 12. We will continue to work closely with the Republic of Korea to ensure it procures the appropriate types and numbers of critical munitions for the early phases of hostilities. Of note, the potential ban on cluster munitions could have a significant impact on our ability to defend the Republic of Korea. Could you say a little bit more about that significant impact, General Scaparrotti?
Yes, sir. Thank you. There's presently a policy that in 19 will go into effect that states basically the use of cluster munitions that have a dud rate of greater than 1% can no longer be a part of our inventory or be employed. I rely on cluster munitions in a very large way to affect operations if we go to crisis on the peninsula. And my concern is that that we will not be able to replace those cluster munitions with proper munitions, or we'll use unitary rounds, which to have the same effect, I have to fire 3 to 5 rounds for each one of those cluster munitions. So my point is we need to work now to both develop munitions that are acceptable, with less than 1% dud rate, so that we can replace them in due time. And until we do, I need to be able to use those cluster munitions that I have in storage now on the peninsula in the interim.
Is the rationale for this policy a humanitarian concern based on the nature of cluster munitions?
Yes, sir.
Do you think it's more humanitarian to preserve these munitions in our arsenal and hopefully deter them or any other munition from ever having to been used, or to remove them from the arsenal and perhaps increase the likelihood of a conflict in which thousands could die?
No, I think that particularly in this case, if we were not to use cluster munitions in a crisis on the peninsula, it will result in greater both military and civilian casualties in the long run, because the extension of the campaign and also the effect that it would have tactically on our forces. So, and I'd be happy to share. We've done some modeling on this. We've done some testing on it. I'm quite confident of that opinion.
Have your predecessors relied on these types of munitions going back to the 1950s?
We've used cluster munitions in the past. They're being used today. For instance, the Russians have used them in a devastating way in Ukraine.
I've noticed. Admiral Harris, I'd like to turn to your testimony on a related topic. Page 20, under the heading Critical Munitions, you state critical munitions shortfalls are a top priority and concern. Do you mean to say there that you actually are facing actual shortfalls now in critical munitions?
That's true, Senator. I've called for increased munitions. There is a shortfall in General Scaparrotti's arena. Part of that shortfall should be paid for by our Korean ally, and that's a subject of discussions that we have with Korea.
Is this not just in Korea, though, but theater-wide? Do you face this kind of shortfall?
I do, but the focus of that part of my written testimony centered on Korea.
Okay. In this kind of unclassified settings, it's something that you can get into in more detail about the kind of shortfalls you're facing?
I prefer not to in this setting, but I would be happy to come back to you in a closed session and talk about it, or come to your office.
I understand, and we might submit questions for the record. I think it would be the height of irresponsibility for civilian and military leaders in this country not to, at a minimum, have sufficient munitions to fight and hopefully deter the wars that we might face, whatever we might disagree about on longer-term, large-ticket budget items. I think we need to have the rounds for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine. Admiral Harris, I'd like to turn to the U.S.-Philippine alliance and something to which Senator McCain alluded about our mutual defense treaty. CSIS has recommended that we should consider offering an explicit guarantee to the Philippines that the U.S. will respond under the mutual defense treaty to an attack on the Philippine military in disputed water or territory. Do you think this option should be considered?
I think we should consider it, and we should have a discussion of it in the policy arena. You know, our obligations under the treaty with the Philippines is pretty clear, and whether we extend that to Second Thomas Shoal, which we don't hold is Philippine sovereign territory, because we don't take a position on sovereignty. We should have that discussion, I believe.
Well, thank you. I think we should have that discussion as well. I think deterrence works best when deterrence is clear, as with relationships that we have with NATO and Taiwan and so forth. My time has expired.
Senator, if you'd like to take additional